Good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to another edition of Beverly's Times Past. My name is Ed Josephs, and tonight we're going to continue with our series, Beverly Remembers World War II. And we have a very special guest with us this evening, Bill Zolner, 80 years young, a veteran of World War II, participated in the D-Day invasion and traveled across France and into Germany with the United States Army. Bill, nice to have you on the program this evening. Co-host Richard Sims. We have a full plate this evening, so we're going to go right into it, and perhaps you could start off by getting Bill to give us a little bit of his background data.
Sure, Ted. Bill, it's nice to have you here. You were with us on our World War II exhibit at the Historical Society back in 1991, and we had a good time talking about some of your adventures, and we're going to get into that tonight. Before we do, maybe you could give us some of your background, where you were born and grew up and went to school.
I was born in 1917, 80 years ago, in Berlin, New Hampshire, of foreign immigrants. My parents were Russian. I had 4 brothers and 2 sisters. I went to the public school through and graduated in 1935. From there, I worked 1 year and I couldn't get a decent job in Berlin, so I decided to go to school. So I went to Boston and attended Bentley School of Accounting and Finance and graduated there. From there, once I graduated, I was employed by the United States Gypsum Company as a cost accountant. It didn't last long because the draft came along, and on the first call, I was called for 1 year.
So you thought?
So I thought, that's right. At that time, I was living in Boston, and when they called me, I left my job, didn't go to work that morning, went to the armory, and they examined me, and next thing I knew, I was at Camp Edwards having hot dog and beans for supper. And I joined, they put me in with the, in the Yankee Division, 1st Battalion, which was really, most of the people were from Worcester, Mass, and so forth. The Finance Division, upon looking at their data, wanted an accountant for the finance department. They came down and asked me to go. And I said, not for 1 year, I've had enough. I wanted to get really, excuse me, I really toughened up. We then, during the training, they took us down to North Carolina for maneuvers.
Let's go back just a bit, Bill, shall we, and talk about, you say you graduated from 35 from high school,
Yeah.
then you worked a little bit,
Yes,
and the war came along and you were drafted.
that's right.
You know, so you had this period of time when you were perhaps living in what we call the Depression period. How was it for you and your family?
Well, it was hard because my folks being immigrants, their thought was to invest in land for security, and when the time came, they would sell the land and send us to school. When my time came, the banks were low. Dad couldn't sell any land and so forth. So I did work for a year or so at the lumber yard, but it didn't work out. So I just went to Boston, and Bentley's at that time, Harry Bentley was a wonderful individual. He made sure that he found a place for me to room, and for that I worked, took care of 2 furnaces at 268 Newbury Street. And then he also found for my meals and so forth, Georgian cafeteria on around the corner where I worked 3 hours a day for the 3 meals.
Oh.
And I got through school that way.
Well, that's good. A lot of hard work, but it paid off for you.
It did pay
in a
off.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
World War II, we think of December 7, 1941. What do you recall of that day, Bill?
Oh, we're coming back from the North Carolina maneuvers, and I was all hopped up knowing that I was going to be discharged within a month or so, not realizing that war was be declared. Came to Camp Edwards. We got in, and first thing we knew, the president says, "You're in for the duration." And it was a shock, because we never thought that we would be going in for such for a period until the war was over.
Yeah. Did you feel a sense of trepidation or amongst your friends and maybe your comrades in arms at that time? Or how did you all take it philosophically? Were you resigned to the fact?
I think the balance of the group, since they were National Guard,
Yep.
It didn't faze them, but it was the inductees that it really not hurt, but it surprised them and got them all shook up.
Bit of a shock.
Yeah.
Richard, before we go to headlines.
Yeah, I know that, we've talked about this before, but coming through the Depression like that and then going directly from that into World War II, as it turned out, World War II ended the Depression. Certainly you couldn't have seen that coming. How did your family make out, just very briefly, during the transition between the Depression and World War II?
Well, I didn't have much contact with my family at that time. I was moving from place to place, but they did have a hard time because Dad worked at the Brown Company paper mill, and it wasn't a steady job or so forth.
Were they from Russia, Bill?
My dad and mother were both from Russia. They migrated, and they, as a matter of fact, they landed at the Ellis Island, then came to Lynn. From Lynn, they were told that the new paper plant was being built in Berlin, New Hampshire. They all went up there and got jobs working there. Made out all right. He built his own home, and there were children. They were still young, but children were all born in Berlin. So that he did well for us, coming in with nothing in hand.
A lot to be proud of, Bill.
I am very proud of him. And he and 25 other individuals started the Russian Orthodox Church in Berlin, New Hampshire.
I see.
He was a member of that church.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Bill Zolner, veteran of World War II, and we'll be right back with you.
Imagine me with my head on your shoulder, and you with your lips getting bolder, a sky full of moon and a sweet mellow tune. I'll buy that dream. Imagine me in a gown white and flowery, folks. I'll buy that dream, a honeymoon in Cairo in a brand new auto gyro, then home by rocket in a wing. We'll settle down near Dallas in a brand new plastic palace. It's not as crazy as you think. Imagine me on our first anniversary with someone like you in the nursery. It doesn't sound bad, and if it can be had, I'll buy that dream. Do-do-do-do. I'll buy that dream.
Okay, Bill, we're back again. And you mentioned you're in the Yankee division. Now, I can relate to that because I was in that during the Vietnam era. And they've been around many, many years, had a valiant record in World War I in particular, and went on to have another great record in World War II. What exactly was the Yankee division like in those days as you got into the beginning of the war?
I enjoyed it. All the training that I got under the commands of the Yankee division. Otherwise, I would have gone to the finance. But very shortly after the war was declared, the Yankee division was reduced from a square division to a triangular division.
Can you describe that briefly?
Square division constitute of 4 regiments plus all the other artillery and so forth along with it. Now, a triangular, they took one regiment out and left the 3 in there. Ironically, I was in the 181st Infantry, and that's the regiment that they pulled back out. By doing that, they had to find some place for us or something to do because all the rest of them, there were a few other divisions that were cut back from square to triangular. They took us and put us as Coast Guard guards. And we had people stationed from Wesley, Rhode Island to the Canadian borderline. And we were supported by tanks and artillery and so forth. And during the dark hours, we had infantrymen patrolling the beaches all the way up. There were occasions where we thought we saw things, but we couldn't really pinpoint it. But later on, they have told us that the German submarines came very close to Jamestown or Wesley, Rhode Island in that area. But my group never saw any of it and so forth. And they rotated all of this group because it was really hard. And so they took some of us and sent us down to Fort Dix, at which time I taught infiltration, mock village, bayonet fighting, and so forth. Everyone as an instructor, because as an infantryman, I had all of that instruction and was able to convey that to the young ones coming in.
Right.
The 90th Infantry Division came into Fort Dix, and upon the examinations and physicals and so forth, quite a few of the individuals were turned down. So they picked our cadre, picked us up and threw us in to supplement the 90th Division losses. And we did not know that the 90th Division was scheduled to go to England and be one of the divisions that would be going over to the attacks of so forth.
What was your impression, Bill, upon landing in England? What was going through your mind at that point in time? You as you said a minute ago, you weren't aware specifically of what your duties were to be, but
We didn't. When we landed in Liverpool, we were like cattle. They moved us into areas where we never saw too many of the civilization. We knew that something was going on. We knew that was something that we were going to do because we started to get heavy, hard training of all types, and that was hard. To give you an example, when I first was inducted, I weighed 208 pounds or so forth. Just before D-Day, I weighed 160 pounds.
imagine that.
And it was all muscle, really muscle.
Now, you were more or less quarantined over there as a unit.
We did not go out at all. We didn't see any civilians or go to any activities. We were kept in a round compound. I don't know how many miles apart, but we were all separated and so forth. And we did not get a chance to see any of England at all, except in the fields where the sheep went by every morning. You did wake up, you hated the sheep and so forth.
Now, again, did you get a sense of where you were going at any point in time over there in England? Or was this, you knew you were training for something that was coming along, but
At that
you weren't sure?
time, we started to feel that something big was coming.
Yeah.
It was when the top commands started to have talks to us. And one of the individuals, I'm glad to state, that Patton came and he spoke to us, and he's the most dynamic individual. Sure, every other word was, but he inspired it. What an individual he was. I'm proud to say that I'm proud that he's from Massachusetts because I have the highest regard for Patton.
he would have been fresh from his successes in North Africa.
That's right.
And I'm sure Eisenhower, Dick must have sent him over there just exactly as what Bill said, to give everybody a
Pep talk
big
to
boost.
And it was at that time we knew that we were on the track for something big.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden one morning they lined us up and we got into the big trucks and they brought us back to Liverpool. And Liverpool was filled with these ships with big balloons over on top of them. And they loaded us, and we knew then where we were going. But we didn't know where or what place we were going, but we knew we were part of the group that would be in on this big day. Some people would ask, were you afraid? I don't know, something was in us that I didn't seem to be afraid, but we knew that looking at the group ahead of us, that maybe half of them would never make it. Or because we knew once we got on the boat, we were like cattle stacked up like this. And they pulled us out of port. Oh, it was raining. And seas were rough. And we got halfway through. Now, the first echelon was way ahead of us. We were the second waves to go because we supported the 4th Infantry Division. And so The first night was not bad, but the second night we knew it had lifted up some little, and we knew we were going in.
So you took off from Liverpool with rough seas,
Yep.
stormy weather,
Yep.
heading off to France, but precisely where you still weren't sure exactly
We
where.
weren't
but-
sure until we were about halfway in the channel when they told us we were going to be supporting the 4th Infantry Division in the attack in France. Our group was headed for Utah Beach. Another segment went to Omaha Beach. We were fortunate that, in that morning when the engineers landed on Utah Beach, they were so successful in knocking a hole in the wall that we didn't lose as many people, soldiers, as we could have.
Right.
Where at Omaha Beach, they weren't. They really got hurt.
I was going to ask you, just prior to landing, you're all on board ship. What's the conversation like? What's going through the minds of the guys? I'm sure there's not a great deal of joking and
There's not a. We did have a service, and that was the night before that we had the service. But the morning that we were jumping off, not one single individual said anything to him. But we buddied up. We watched each other's back. And so when we got off the boat down onto the LCIs to take us in, that was a scary time. That's when you start realizing, because once you get closer to the shore, you saw all the debris,
right.
all the bodies.
We're going
Bodies.
to stop you right there, Bill, and when we come back, we'll have you tell
Okay.
us a little bit about this phase of your Army life. Quite a story, Richard, don't you think?
Spellbinding.
We'll be right back with you, ladies and gentlemen.
I'll be seeing you, those familiar places, baby, that this heart of mine embraces all day through. In that small cafe, park across the way, children's carousel, chestnut tree, the wishing well. I'll be seeing you every lovely summer's day. Hey, everything that's bright and gay, say, thinking of you that funny way. Find you in the morning, and when the night is blue, I'll be looking at the moon, but I'll be seeing you.
All right, Bill, we're back again, and we hated to leave you right there, hung up right at the edge of the landing craft going onto the beach, but you watched the documentaries of that, and there was a camera in one of those small landing craft, and I can remember seeing this shot over and over again in these various programs, and you can actually see bullets hitting the water out in front of the boat, and you can see the beach in the distance and some buildings further beyond that. And I can't even imagine when that ramp comes down, stepping off into that fury of hailstorm of bullets and everything else and people being hit. And I don't know how you can even begin to describe that, but I wish you'd continue.
Well, that was the toughest time of all, because although what you tried to do when you jumped off, and our pilot of our landing craft didn't want to beach his craft, so he didn't go far in enough. When we jumped into water up to here, and we carried the gun up like this, and that made you just as vulnerable, because the Germans on top there took the anti-aircrafts, I think they call them 88s, and made them from anti-aircraft to flat trajectory, and they just flew right in onto you. So that what you did, once you get in the water, we got in the water, you tried as hard as you can. Well, I dumped my pack, but I had a strip of rifle bullets this way and another one this way. If they ever hit me, I would have gone up. But we went, hit the shore, and the minute you hit the shore, you dug a hole as fast as you could to just try to hide. But our commander got in, and he quickly got us together, and we went through the opening in there and got away from all of this, but we lost a lot. A lot
of the fellas, not a lot, but many men drowned, did they not, Bill?
Yes.
Yeah. Because of the heavy weight they were carrying and the high tide and all?
That's why I dropped my pack right off, because I couldn't have made it, because he hadn't brought up. But see, the group ahead of us had done most of the work anyway on the beaches, clearing that out, because it was 6 or 8 hours past D-Day that we landed in support of the 4th Infantry Division.
You were telling us that also you would take off any insignia of rank that you might have on you.
This is one of the mistakes that I think we made, is that on the helmet you had down here straight white mark signifying a commander or an officer. A non-commissioned officer had a white streak this way. I don't know how the Germans find out, but they picked all those out the quickest.
Yeah.
And so I took my helmet, dropped it. There was a helmet floating on the water. I picked that up, and that was it. And
the confusion must have been something awful, Bill, on the beach.
yes, but it was drilled into us that once we hit the beach, we were to look for our commanding unit to come together.
Yep.
And having good commanders and good platoon leaders, we were able to save a lot of the lives, get them away from the beaches as fast as we could. Sure, we lost a lot. And it hurt to see your friends floating in the water.
Yeah. And you came in on Utah Beach, and you were telling us that Omaha was even heavier fighting than where you were,
yeah.
as bad as it was for you.
Omaha was even worse than that. They were trapped on the beach. They couldn't open up. They had to scale the walls to get at the Germans up above. They were embedded, and they were just flowing in and getting them.
That's where the cliffs were, is that correct?
That's
that
right.
You see in the Longest Day, for instance, where they had to fire the ropes with the grappling hooks
That's
up to
right.
the, yeah.
That
Richard,
was
the scales could have been tipped either way at that point.
Oh,
Richard.
yeah, oh, yeah, absolutely.
they could have, I don't know. I think there were too many of us there.
Yeah.
There were enough to go through, no matter how many we lost.
Plus, as it turned out, the Germans were holding back their reserves because they were still not sure that that's where the actual attack was coming from.
I think they were, I found out later that they had a dummy place up above that they rigged up, and the Germans felt that they were going to come in there where we went down.
Right.
down below.
Could you actually see the enemy, Bill, visually see them, or you just,
No,
you couldn't?
couldn't.
They were far enough away?
Far enough away that we couldn't see them, but you could see the fire. Once a fire, you could see where the flash would come from. And so you'd got away from them. But we had a few sharpshooters that were pretty good.
No. Now, you landed and moved inland as fast as you possibly could.
That's right.
At what point did you begin to feel that you might be on the beach, or the invasion might be going as well as could be expected?
Our group with the 4th Infantry Division and so forth had a chance to go in quite a ways.
Okay.
But it was Omaha Beach that was holding us up. They hadn't. But once they broke through, then we started pushing
I see.
and pushed into the, let's see, I think part of our group got close to St. Marie Église. And from there on, we pushed inward.
Yeah. And as you said, it was just very, very tough seeing your friends, people that you've known for a good many months, years maybe, just go down.
That's right.
Did you ever think, Bill, that your number might be called at this point in time, or were you too busy thinking of other things at that critical moment?
That is something that I wondered why. The fear was there, but somehow it was instilled in us to keep going. And you butted up, and you watched for your buddy, he watched for you, and you kept going. And I thought sometimes I came close. I was in the foxhole, and my buddy was doing guard. For instance, one slept, the other one would guard, and we heard this whistle, ooh, and then plop, one of the artillery shells come in, a dud. You then knew somebody was watching for you.
Yeah. Sure.
Close enough that you could see
Oh,
it. So if
so close enough.
So if it had blown up,
It would have taken me, taken my buddy and I, wherever it goes.
Now, did the Germans right from the very beginning put up a very stiff resistance, or did you find that they sort of fell back as you began to progress?
I felt that they fell back, not too far, but fell back some to reorganize. See, we caught them with a surprise.
Yeah.
And they were disorganized for a while. But it didn't take them long to organize. And they had a wonderful terrain to fight us. And that's hedgerow.
Tell us what those hedgerows were all about, Bill.
See, the farmers in France, instead of having fences, they build up these high 6-foot mounds of solid of loam and everything, rocks and so forth. And they made the boundaries with this.
I see.
And that was the hardest thing of all, because you didn't know who was on the other side. And the Germans had taken advantage of that, and they would always park their infantrymen 1 or 2 hedgerows behind. And once you climbed the hedgerow to get over there, they had you zeroed in.
Yeah. Plus the German 88 tanks, the Panzer of tanks were involved there.
Yep. And so we had a rough time with the hedgerow fighting.
Yeah.
We lost a lot of people, but somehow our commanders got a little bit more knowledge, and they made a scoop in front of a tank that they could bring up this tank and take that scoop and just scoop away the whole hedge, and you could go right through. But prior to that, you'd have to go over. So the tanks with their scoops saved a lot of us.
You were telling us that one of the most scariest of all moments was when you received the order to fix bayonets.
Yes, that is one of the, I don't have memories of how I responded, but we couldn't take this hill without a battle with bayonets. So the captain said, fix bayonets. That's the scariest thing of all. You take the bayonet, put it on your rifle, and I taught that. And even I wasn't scared. But when we went over, to this day I say that if anyone who was truly in a bayonet fight can remember it and say it, they're lying. Because I don't know how I went through. It was one of the most scariest times, because what you're doing, you're hitting the stomach and pulling them back. Next one, pulling them back. I couldn't remember that. I don't know whether I hit anyone, whether I stabbed anyone, but I know I was in it. I was on the other side.
And you were alive at the end.
And I was alive, but my buddies they stacked them like cordwood.
Richard, before we go to headlines?
Yeah, just going back for a second, you're talking about Utah Beach and Omaha Beach. How close proximity-wise were these two beaches to one another?
I'm not sure.
In other words, they weren't necessarily adjacent.
No, they weren't adjacent. They were a distance away.
Spread out.
Spread out.
Okay, so you weren't necessarily aware of what was going on.
No, we weren't aware. Even if we were,
You had your own problems.
We had our own problems to get through.
Sure.
But we knew once we got over it and then connected up with all the other groups, because they made these connections.
Right, so then you had a big semicircle when it was all done.
That's right.
Sure.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Bill Zolner, Army veteran of World War II, and we'll rejoin you in just 1 minute.
This is the Army, Mr. Jones. No private rooms or telephone. You had your breakfast in bed before, but you won't have it there anymore. This is the Army, Mr. Green. We like our barracks nice and clean. You had a housemaid to clean your floor, but she won't help you out anymore. Do what the buglers command. They're in the Army and not in a band. This is the Army, Mr. Brown. You and your baby went to town. She had you worried, but this is war, and she won't worry you anymore. This is the Army, Mr. Jones.
Okay, we're back again, Bill, and after this description of hand-to-hand combat, let's get back into a more stable period of time after the fighting subsided. What were living conditions like on a battlefield when the battle wasn't actually going on? I mean, day-to-day life, cleanliness, food, what have you?
Oh, I remember when we, after quite a lengthy stay in the front, they pulled us back in what they call a rest period. And they gave you a change of clothes. Now remember, you have, I don't know how many days clothing on. And you slept with them, ate with it on, continuously on. And you smelled. And there were no places that you could take a shower or so forth, but they brought in clothing, you changed, and I remember getting out of mine and putting it aside, and it just stood up like that. It did. It was so soiled and
Stiff, yeah.
stiff and so forth.
Kind of ripe, huh?
Yeah, and it was the first time we really had a good meal. Hot kitchen meal. The American Red Cross came in and gave us one donut and a cup of coffee, and that's it. The Salvation Army then came in later on, opened up the kitchen, and said, "This is yours. Have whatever you want." I'll never forget them. I never do, even now.
Up on the front line, though, it was what, C rations?
C ration. When you were able to carry it, you carried always a pack in your back, because if stopped, you got hungry, all you do is peel off a can. There's canned stuff and so forth, and you gobbled it down. There was no coffee. You lived on that.
What was a C ration, Bill? What was inside the can?
God, I don't remember. I was so mad at it. But you had crackers along with it. And in each package, they had cigarettes. And, you know, you can't smoke on the front because you light up and they can see you.
Yep.
So you threw them away. So I thought that was useless, but there were others, things that they had. You lived on K rations all the time until you pulled back for rest period.
Bunking out in foxholes, were you?
Oh, I wish I could visit. I can remember most all of my foxholes.
Can you?
Oh. And I remember in one place that we were coming by, and we heard that zzz, and no foxholes and nothing to jump, and I jumped. And you know, the French always put their manure in the front of the barn, and plop. Oh. And then when that shell came down his plow, it was but luckily you didn't hit any of us. You didn't mind that. You just shook yourself off. You stunk anyway.
Right. Speaking of the French people, how were the civilian populations carrying on at this point? Here the war was raging all about their little farms and towns and so forth.
Well, you never, being in infantry, you didn't see civilians many at all.
I see.
But we had orders one time. The civilians were sneaking in and stealing petrol or fuel oil. And so the orders came in from higher up. If you catch even a Frenchman or so forth stealing the petrol, shoot him.
Huh.
That was patent.
Yeah.
He says, don't ask questions, shoot him.
Yeah.
Because when we needed a lot of the fuel and so forth, because once we broke through Paris and so forth, then we were going fast.
That was one of the major reasons that Patton had to stop, wasn't it? Lack of fuel,
that's
outran
right.
his supply line?
We were, our regiment was attached to Patton's Third Army, and we really went with him. He was out to go. He outmaneuvered all of them. And because we cleaned up after him while he wore. And then they all ran out of petrol.
Yeah.
And so when they were bringing the petrol in, these civilians were stealing a lot.
Yeah.
And he got mad.
I bet he did. I'd like to ask you, along the lines of the civilians and all, were there many of them killed, Bill, by, accidental bombing, or did they get in the way of the firefights and
Yes,
so
there
forth?
were.
There were a lot of
There
civilian casualties.
A lot of casualties because pinpointed, because when our airplanes came in to give us support and strafing, you couldn't miss. I mean, you couldn't say, "Oh, I'm going to go over here." They went right down.
Whatever
there.
was in the way got it.
They were got it. But
You can't imagine, Richard, here in the United States, what it's like to have to live under those conditions. I would assume the last point in time we had to face that was back in the Civil War days, but just awful to be on the sidelines and yet be fired at. And
well, a lot of the French in the Rhine area had wine cellars, dug way down in, and that's where they hid.
Well,
And they were safe that way because
that's the place to hang out in a war, in a wine cellar, I would say. Don't you think, Richard? Were you ever invited in, Bill, to any of these?
Captain went down one, and he commandeered my Jeep, and we threw all the other supplies out and lined champagne bottles this way in the back of the Jeep. And that saved us from drinking water.
Yeah.
And we couldn't drink, you didn't dare to drink water because they could have, you couldn't.
How did the French people receive you? We read where they were rather, well, other than Paris, where we were all welcome, but they were rather cool and distant to us, to a degree. Was that true, Bill? or not?
Well, some places yes, some places no, because we had to be destructive, and some of the places were torn apart.
Right.
And the Germans did the same thing. They tore some beautiful churches. They tore apart, and they'd put up sharpshooters in the belfry, and that's the first thing that we'd do. We'd take our cannons and we'd take the belfry off, because that's where they spied.
That's where they'd be.
Any high point of vantage up there.
And that was their livelihood. They loved their church,
Yeah.
and we had to destroy some of them.
Yeah. Richard, we're going up one more time to headlines. Any thought here for Bill?
Yeah, I just finished reading a book about the Battle of the Bulge, which we'll get into later, if not this evening on another edition of this. But a lot of these villages were fought over back and forth several times. I mean, they didn't just go through and then that was the end of it and then the people could get their lives back together. A lot of this seesawed back and forth for days, weeks even. And this must have been just unbelievable. Again, as you said, Ted, for the people that were living there. I can't imagine trying to live some kind of life in that kind of surroundings.
Yeah, that was the only time that I met some civilians is when they pulled us back for rest period before Bastogne. And I met some of the people there. They were cordial, but they were a little back. They were still afraid. They couldn't understand it all. But
I'm sure they must have all been in a daze. Many of them from all of the shellacking that they were taking from all sides, both sides.
both sides were slacking them, right and left, and they were losing some of their people just as much, and it was just as rough on them.
Yeah.
And as one of my comments says, the only time I saw a civilian was a dead one.
Very true.
We're talking with Bill Zolner, ladies and gentlemen, resident of Beverly, veteran of World War II, and we shall be back with you one more time.
back, Bill, and we're going to have to move along here because the show is about over, unfortunately, and we're going to have you back for part 2 of this so we can find out how the rest of this went. Very briefly, after this high point in the D-Day invasion, you were to change roles, sort of, and get into an intelligence gathering organization, so to speak, and I'm sure you're going to go into that. Just briefly, how did that happen? And leave us for something to talk about next time.
Well, seeing that I had Russian background, I could speak Russian. I also was a Jeep driver, and these 2 officers, Captain Hickman, Lieutenant Steinbach, got me to join them in the intelligence group. They outfitted a Jeep that had armor plating in the bottom about, an inch and 3/4. They had armor plates on the sides, inch and 3/4. They had built-in a 30 caliber machine gun on the side, and then they put a 50 caliber machine gun on a pedestal on top. And that gave us power enough to go wherever we wanted to in going out doing the intelligence work that we had to do.
Ted?
Basically, your intelligence work was getting a hold of a German or 2 behind the lines and bringing them back for interrogation. Is that correct, Bill?
That was quite a few times, and that's where both Captain Hickman and Lieutenant Steinbach were experts in that. I'd drive them into the area, they'd go in after them, and usually Germans on the outpost, they'd leave one sleeping and one standing guard. And that's where the one standing guard really got it. And they would, 2 of them would then bring him back, tug him back because he was out. They'd hit him, I don't know where, but how, but he was out. They'd drop him into the Jeep, and away I'd go with him. And, there's many times I'd say, Zolner, we're going to leave you someday because I'd be underneath the Jeep waiting. Because you had to be very quiet, and they were quiet. You couldn't hear them walk.
Just like Indians.
Oh, man, that captain was so slick in knocking someone out like that you couldn't think of any.
So you were the chauffeur?
I was the chauffeur and also the translator and the man who got the food and everything. But we 3 became a buddy. And each one, captain, lieutenant, and a private.
Well, we're going to stop right here, Bill Zolner, because you have such an interesting tale to continue to tell us. We'd like to have you come back for another program. And we thank you so much for coming along to join us this evening on Beverly's Times Past. Dick, we're down to a minute. I know you brought in a couple of headlines there. You might want to just mention briefly what you have there.
Yeah, this was
30
something
seconds.
this appeared the other day in the paper because as we tape this, it's about a week after Veterans Day. And basically what these 2 articles say are that, first of all, the World War I veterans are down to a mere 6,800 nationwide, and the World War II veterans have finally dropped below the number of veterans that were in the Vietnam War. And so, I guess, needless to say,
the ranks are thinning.
The ranks are thinning, and that's why it's so important that we continue with these interviews with people like Bill this evening and get down as much of these memories as we can before they're all gone.
That says it all, Dick. Bill, thanks for coming on, and we'll look forward to chatting with you one more time.
Okay.
Dick, good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching, and we'll be back with you very soon. Ed Josephs, so long for now. good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to yet another edition of Beverly's Times Past. My name is Ed Josephs, and tonight we are going to continue with our series, which we call Beverly Remembers World War II, with co-host Richard Sims. Good evening, Richard.
Good evening, Ted.
And tonight, Dick, we're very fortunate again to have our friend Bill Zolner back with us for part 2 of his series, and I can't say enough about these older people who are now in their 70s, and in Bill's case, 80 years of age, being able to recount their days back 55 and more years ago during the World War II era.
That's right.
And Bill, thank you so much for coming back and joining us again on Beverly's Times Past. Just to review a little bit, Richard and Bill, of part 1, we mentioned that you were a Berlin, New Hampshire native, and you are the son, really, of Russian immigrants. Your mom and dad came from the old country and settled eventually up in Berlin, New Hampshire. You were drafted in World War II. You were drafted in 1941, and you went to the Yankee Division, where you served for a time. In fact, you had some shore duty, which took you from Rhode Island right up to the Canadian border along the coast. And then you went into Fort Dix, where you joined the 90th Infantry Division. Richard, why don't you take it from there?
And when you were in the 90th Division, you went to England, had intensive training for what turned out to be the D-Day invasion of Normandy, and landed at Utah Beach, I believe, plus D-Day plus 6 hours. So 6 hours after the initial landing, you were on the beach. And your outfit fought into France through the infamous hedgerow country, saw a lot of combat, and at some point along the way, you ended up being put into an intelligence unit. And that led to some pretty interesting adventures, and perhaps you'd like to pick it up this evening at that point.
I was assigned with Captain Hickman, Lieutenant Steinbeck, 2 officers from Texas officers that had developed intelligence for the regiment. We had a Jeep that I should mention that was really armor-plated. It was a little tank by itself. You had, I believe, close to 1.25 inch armor plate all on the sides, down the bottom, and so forth. And we had a .30 caliber machine gun in front, manned by Lieutenant Steinbeck, and a .50 caliber machine gun with a lot of ammunition in back by Captain Hickman. And we had a lot of adventures that way.
Bill, I have to ask you, did you really know what you were getting into when you found yourself with this group? I mean, as you're going to relate to us, you had some pretty hair-raising adventures.
No, I had no idea what I was going to get into. We didn't have any chance to really object or not want to do it. We had to do it. Someone had to do it. I was fortunate enough that I had some knowledge in Russian and a little bit of German, so that helped, and that was one of the reasons that I was attached to the intelligence section.
Tell us what your primary mission was when you went out of the Jeep with your fellow comrades.
90% of the time was to go out in front, see what was ahead of us, and also in the evenings, late at night, venture out into the enemy territory. The 2 officers would go out, capture a prisoner, knock him out, and they'd bring him back to the regiment for interrogation to know who's in front of us.
Richard, wouldn't you say that's almost a suicidal mission?
Well, I keep thinking of snipers and all that sort of thing. I mean, how do you know what's around the next bend in the road? It would scare the dickens out of me, I'll tell you.
You never did know, but I know that at one time we drove down the path, and on either side of us, the Germans were sleeping. And if they ever woke up, we would have been dead ducks. We had a lot of times we had that experience, but it was the officers. I had Captain Hickman and Lieutenant Steinberg were two terrific officers that had a lot of guts.
Now, you were dressed in American military uniforms.
Absolutely, yes. All of us.
Yeah.
And we had to. We didn't never went out in normal dress.
Yeah.
We always had our uniforms on.
I was going to say you weren't dressed as German soldiers would have dressed on any occasion to maybe
No.
confuse the enemy a little bit.
The enemy didn't see us because when we went out, by the time they saw us, we had them back. Otherwise, we'd move back and not get any.
Yeah. Any particular story that you can recall of those adventures, Bill? Any most difficult capture, maybe?
Actually, not too many because the officers did it. And you know, the Germans around their front lines would put piano wire across the road so that when we'd wander into that territory, we knew that somewhere would be there. We would put the prisoners up in front, hold them, so that if there was piano wire, he'd get it first and not us.
I see.
So that then we had the personnel build us a steel bar that came up in front with a hook, and that would snap the piano wire from us.
How many of these missions, Bill, can you roughly recall going out on? Many?
Many missions.
Yeah.
Many, because in the intelligence area, it changes from day to day. You want to know what outfit is on your left, what outfit is on the right, who's in front, and so forth. So that, and you've got to be careful of counterintelligence also.
Yeah.
They'd be doing the same thing.
Yeah, I'm sure. Now, you did have one kind of hair-raising event that happened to you. You were telling us about in your Jeep one day that you were actually hit by a German tank.
One of the, we were in the rear echelon when the front lines needed some food and so forth. And we were sitting in front of Metz at that time. And getting there to the outpost, you had to go over a hill and down, and up the outpost wasn't there. Foolishly, I took that up, went up the hill, and as I hit the top, they must have seen me, because I quickly went down, did my duty, gave them the food, gave them the ammunition, and so forth, and started back up. And just as I hit the top of the hill, I heard this crack, crack, crack. They had zeroed in on that hill, and they had me. Luckily, they were poor shots because all they got is my 4 tires. And I drove down to the rear echelon on the rims of the Jeep. And I went to the commander and I told him I needed tires. He says, go back, have it done, put on quickly. So I went back and the maintenance people started giving me a hard time. And I says, I've got to get that Jeep back into operation. Oh, we can't have tires, you know, it's hard to get. So I got on the telephone, which we carry a little, and I called Colonel Porn, and I said, Colonel Porn, it'll be 2 or 3 hours before I can get a... He said, what is this? He says, let me talk to the one in charge. He says, when was the last time you've been in the front? If you don't get those 4 tires on in 15 minutes, you're going to be in the front. I got my tires quick.
I'll bet you did.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're talking, Dick, December 1944, and Bill, I believe, is on his way. You got the call to go to Bastogne, did you not, Bill?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
We were in a rest period area, and orders came through to take all of our insignias off, all vehicles, jeeps, and even ourselves, and head for, as a backup to Patton. Patton was the one who led us into Bastogne, and the snow was deep. It was cold, and we did. At that time, the Germans had been stopped, and Patton, with his group, and a few others that were assigned into that area, started cleaning up and pushing it back. We lost a lot of people, a lot of our soldiers, through cold and frost bites and whatnot, because there was no place to sleep. And we were hungry. The supplies didn't come up to us until later on. When we first went in, the fog was still there. The planes couldn't come in. A day later, the fog lifted, and in came our blessed Air Force, God help them. They came in and they racked the whole front lines out, and we were able to advance and push the Germans back.
Were they able to parachute food supplies down to you and all of
At
that?
that time, they parachuted a lot of food, and ammunition is a thing, and so forth. But I've got to give credit to those who held their lines in Bastogne. They were wonderful. They were just the strongest bunch that I can think of.
Before we go to headlines, Dick, that certainly was one of the real trying points of the whole World War II affair, don't you think?
Well, I just read a book on that recently, and of course the thing was a last-ditch gamble by Hitler that he could at least slow the Allies down and perhaps talk some sort of peace agreement that would be beneficial to him. And so he launched this tremendous strike, which really caught the Allies by surprise on, I believe it was December 16th. And to do this, he stripped pretty much the rest of his army in other areas of the front and threw everything into this area which he had hoped to get up as far as Antwerp. And of course it stalled at Bastogne simply because the Allies had put in anyone that could stand.
That's right.
Cooks, clerks,
and
motor mechanics, you name it. Anyone that could carry a gun was put into the lines, and they held. They improvised and they held. And it stopped them, and then they turned and pushed them back. Amazing story, probably the most amazing story. And as Bill has pointed out, that we lost more people there pretty much than anywhere else during World War II, pretty much since the Civil War.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Bill Zolner, a veteran of World War II, Army veteran, and when we come back from our headlines, Bill will have more to say.
The time is shortened. October 15th is the deadline, so get your gifts bought, wrapped, and mailed before October 15th. And scatter a little hunk of home among the millions of fighting men and valiant women who are standing between us and aggression on the 25th of this man's December. Think of every one of them dreaming, I'll be home for Christmas. You can count on me. Please have snow and mistletoe and presents on the tree. Christmas Eve will find me where the love light gleams. I'll be home for Christmas, if only in my dreams. And that's the only way most of them will make it this Christmas, in their dreams.
of a white Christmas, just like the ones I used to know, where the treetops glisten and children listen to hear sleigh bells in the snow. I'm dreaming of a white Christmas with every Christmas card I write. May your days be merry and bright, and may all your Christmases be white.
Okay, we're back again. Bill, after the Battle of the Bulge had been put down in January of 1945, your unit would have been heading into Germany. Which route did you take, and what adventures did you have from that point?
We followed actually Patton's thrust through the forest northward. We later were taken away from him and put into, I think, Third Army, which then headed right into Germany, into Frankfurt and so forth. Since we were the cleanup people, they had already pushed most of the Germans out of there, and what we were doing, cleaning up and so forth, moving right back in. We didn't see too much action, except with one occasion we ran into, Captain Hickman saw a German tank that was still had mobility, and we started chasing him. And we chased him into the forest. It's luckily he didn't have any ammunition, ran out of gas, so we captured the operator and brought him in. But
They had those 88 guns, did they, mounted on their tanks?
They had those, if they were fully loaded, God help us. But we had, I don't know, these two Texans, Captain Hickman and Lieutenant Steinbeck, had no fear, no fear.
And you went right along with
And
the
I
party.
had to go along. I went along with them. They never let me down.
Now, on your route into Germany, you were telling us you had the occasion on occasion to stop into a French cellar for little taste of wares.
We got into a city and we knew that someone had told us that there was a cellar full of champagne. So we found it, went down a cellar way down in the ground, and sure, there was cases and cases of wonderful champagne. We took everything in the back of the Jeep and dumped it, and lined the back of it with straw, and then put the bottles all down, put another layer of straw, another bottle, and we lived. See, at that time, you couldn't drink water, so we drank champagne.
Yeah. They not only were a fighting unit, they were a thinking man's army, too, were they not?
This is beginning to put a new light on World War II for me. It's not quite as bad as they described it, perhaps.
Well, to talk about the dark side of things, Bill, and I know we'll just mention this briefly, but you were eyewitness to it, the concentration camps. Let's start, first of all, with the American camps that you viewed.
We viewed one especially that we took, and when I went in and took a look at it, you wouldn't believe that a person could get so thin. All that they were bones. They stood up, and with all the strength that they had, they stood up to show that they were all right. But they were underfed. They must have been mistreated. it was horrible.
You also had witness to the Jewish camps, which are even
Worse.
more deplorable.
More deplorable, and then we saw areas where they had dug trenches and then killed them and turned them over. We saw the furnaces and so forth that they had out there, and you had to be there to know, because here in America you never would realize that people would do such things to other people. It was horrible.
To imprint on people's minds, I think General Eisenhower had the German civilian population come to witness these camps, did he not, before they
Yes, and they wouldn't believe it.
Yep.
Until he had them corralled and pushed right into the area to show them what they had done.
Richard?
Yeah, there's newsreel footage of that, and it shows, I think, a mayor of some town nearby one of those camps and his family actually being led through. And he's sort of arrogant and like, well, so what?
Yeah.
And, you know, just the attitude was still there for a lot of them. They just felt like, you know, that's the way it was. So what? Yeah.
Bill, let's say a word now about one of your favorite generals, George Patton.
Well, he is my favorite one, because our unit was attached to his unit quite a few times. Patton would never ask any of his troops to do anything that he himself wouldn't do it. He was out there inspiring them, inspiring us and pushing us to it. Many people said that he was wrong in striking an individual that had whatever happened to him, but I say that was the best thing that he did to the young man. It got him out of his the depths into realism, and realizing that he can't be that way. So that I don't blame him at all. I would follow him anywhere.
He certainly was fearless, and he knew how to fight. He knew how to.
He knew how to fight, and he knew how to. He was a good strategist. He knew how to go about it, but he was too not ambitious, but he wanted to really give him hell, all of it, and he can't do it alone.
Did you have any close encounters with him, Bill? By that I mean, were you close to him physically at any point in time?
Well, when we crossed the Tyne River, he went across first. Then he came back over, and that river had overflown. I was about like this here, and I saw his
pearl-handled
pistol and his string. You know how he is stretched like that and so forth. Wonderful.
Yeah.
But he went across there first with his tank.
I'm sure he must have. He was certainly a character, Richard, but as we said, one of the true fighting generals of World War II.
Oh, yeah, and he had no truck for bureaucracy or any of that sort of thing. You know, he just wanted to get on with it.
Yeah.
He said, if you slow down, you know, you're going to lose. He says, you got to keep moving.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Bill Zolner, Army veteran of World War II, and we'll be right back with you.
Right you are, Jimmy. How about your famous picture and recording arrangement of Blues in the Night?
Bill, we talked about champagne a while ago, and I understand you've got a little story about some Russian vodka. You might like to get into that.
We were rolling into Germany, and on our left, I believe, was a Russian tanker unit. And we stopped for a while, and our commander, general, at that time wanted to go and meet him. And since I could speak Russian, and I was in the intelligence, Captain Hickman, Lieutenant Steinbeck, and he and I went to see this commander of the Russian tank division. As we were getting close, I said to the general, I said, now look, I know the Russians. They're going to offer you a drink. I said, please don't blink an eye or make any expression. He looked at me, seriously, what's going on? Anyway, I introduced him to the commander in Russian, and I told him he was our commander. And the Russian commander reached down into his tank, brought up a big bottle of vodka and a big glass of empty glass, filled it up to the top, went zing, didn't even blink. I knew that was 100 proof. And he went, same glass, didn't wipe it, filled it all up, handed it to the general. General took it, started drinking it, and you could see his face get white, right down, 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 down. He didn't even blink. I was quite proud of him. And so I said to the Russian commander, zakustku, that is something to eat. He reached down and he got a kielbasa, kielbasa which was dried, broke a piece. They first always eat it first themselves, and gave a piece to me, and I gave it to our general. I said, General, eat this quick. And he did. Later on, he says, Zolner, if I knew it, I would have killed you for it. He said, but he said in a joking manner, but I was quite proud of him, because drinking that whole glass of 100% vodka and not blink, oh boy.
Yeah. I'm sure the Russian general was probably setting up your American general just to see what he was made of.
Yeah. There was one other incident. He was showing us all around the units. Their machinery, their tanks compared to ours was below par.
Yeah.
I came to this tank and went up on the turf and looked down. There was a young person there. So I said to him, how come you keep taking young people to drive your tank? He says, young people? He says, take your helmet off. Took the helmet off, and it was a young lady.
Oh.
Young lady that was driving the tank. All the kitchen help, all the other help were all women, because the Russians lost a lot of people around Petrograd and Stalingrad and Moscow during the German invasion. So they utilized even the young women and old ladies and whatnot into them.
Yeah, you see pictures of that.
Yeah.
That's, Richard, that's something that's perhaps a little publicized, that the Russians did have huge casualties in World War II. We talk about the Allied losses and all, which were profound, but when Hitler went into Russia there, they died by the thousands and thousands, did they not, Bill?
Yeah.
Tell me this now about the relationship between the Russians and Americans. At this point in 1945, when you're both coming into Germany, things were pretty friendly, were they not? Between the two armies, anyway, the fighting men.
It was friendly, but as we got nearer and nearer to the Berlin and so forth, it changed. They wanted to go in and get revenge. They wanted all of Berlin. Well, we were there. The English were there, and we couldn't allow them to have it all.
Yep.
So it deteriorated right then and there. And Eisenhower had a hard time really separating Berlin. But because Berlin was the objective of all the armies, because it was there that it ended up.
Mm-hmm. I think General Eisenhower, in the end, though, chose not to go in there first, Richard, for diplomatic purposes. Am I not correct on that?
Yeah,
Rather
and
than
he got a lot of flack for that.
Because we were there.
That's right. We were right on the outskirts, and Patton wanted to go right in. In fact, Patton, I believe, wasn't he that said that we ought to rearm the Germans and side with them and go after the Russians, because we're going to have to sooner or later. Yeah.
That's my pattern.
Yeah.
Now, we want you to tell us, Bill, about the your decorations. Now, you were awarded 2 Bronze Stars. And would you tell us how you came to be awarded those stars?
The major Bronze Star that I got was for an episode that I don't know why I did it or why I don't know. But anyway, I was in the rear echelon when the call came through that they were all out of ammunition and they had to attack very shortly, and they didn't have any. But we had it all in the back echelon, so they loaded up a sidecar. What are those that attached to
Like a trailer?
a trailer? Filled the trailer up with ammunition, everything, and also my back of my Jeep. Because I knew where the front was. I had to always, being intelligent, you always had to know where they were because you had to make contact on them. So I took the Jeep and started out fully, and I would say about a mile from the front lines when all of a sudden I hit a German patrol. And they opened up on me. God, I don't know why. They must have been bad shots. Because if any one of those had hit the trailer on my Jeep, it would have blown it sky high. But I was fortunate. I had that 50 caliber machine gun and 30 caliber on the side. I got up on the 50 caliber, and I put that belt in and started, and I fought. And our troops in the front heard, and they can tell, the difference between our shooting and all there.
The guns sound different.
Differently. They sent out a patrol quickly, and they were able to
Come to your rescue.
Rescued me.
Yeah.
And I got all the ammunition without having any of it blown up or anything. I got it all back in. And didn't get it scratched, except I lost my helmet.
Yeah. And for this, you were awarded?
I awarded a Bronze Star, one Bronze Star. The other Bronze Star was for infantry and work that I had done otherwise. But this first one was for beyond call.
Yeah. Kind of amazing, huh, Dick?
Yeah, now you were alone at this time in the Jeep?
I was alone.
So when these people started shooting at you, sort of instinct takes over, you just stop and jump up there and...
I knew if I didn't fight, I'd be dead.
Could you see them? Did you know where they were?
With traces bullets,
okay,
you could tell where they were. And luckily our troops came in and they got them all.
We're talking with Bill Zolner, ladies and gentlemen, Army veteran, World War II, and we'll be right back with you very shortly.
This is the G.I. Jive, man alive. Starts with the bugler blowing reveille over your bed when you arrive. Jack, that's the G.I. Jive. Roodly-toot, jump in your suit, make a salute. Boot! After you wash and dress, more or less, you go get your breakfast in the beautiful little cafe they call the Mess. Jack, when you convalesce, of your seat, into the street, make with the feet. If you're a PVT, your duty is to salute the L-I-E-U-T. But if you brush the L-I-E-U-T, the MP makes you KP on the QT. This is the GI Jive, man alive. They give you a private tank that features a little device called fluid drive. Jack after you revive. Chunk all your junk back in the trunk, all on the bunk. Clunk. Jive, man alive. They give you a private tank that features a little device called fluid drive. Jack after you revive. Chunk all your junk back in the trunk, all on your bunk.
Bill, as you went into Germany, what was the attitude of the German civilians as you went through the different towns along your way toward Berlin?
It varied. Some places they didn't say a word. Other places, especially in one area, we went in and the point, see, when you go into the infantry, you always have 1, 2 points.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, crack, and our point got killed. Crack, second point got killed, and the sergeant said, "That's mine." And he took his machine gun that he had, and he ran up into this house, and he looked around, and there in the attic was a young man with he must have been about 15, 16 years old, in the attic, through the window, was picking off our troops.
Mm.
So he just went.
So some of the civilians did not give up easily,
They didn't give
even
up.
though they must have known that all was lost
That's
at this
right.
point in time.
And they wouldn't believe that they were losing.
Let's change the subject slightly, and would you offer a word about General Eisenhower, your thoughts about him and his carrying on of the war?
I think he was one of the smartest generals that the United States has ever had, with the exception of Marshall. Marshall was the one who was in the States, who really was the backbone of all the activity. Eisenhower fulfilled the duties plus. He had, to me, he had more problems with the English general than anyone else, and he was able to amicably solve them and not get into a lot of problems. I give him a lot of credit. I saw him only once in front of Graville, which was one city before Metz. We took Metz for the first time. But he was there before that. and he talked to us all once.
He certainly had the weight of the world on his shoulders, Richard.
Oh,
he
he
sure
was
did.
wonderful.
Yeah.
And as I think you were referring to General Field Marshal Montgomery, was that
Yes.
the fellow that you were talking about? And he and Mr. General Eisenhower did not see eye to eye on many occasions. Not to mention when General Patton would get mixed up and General Bradley, and there'd be quite a few people that Eisenhower would have to keep pacified as the war progressed. Do you think he made the right decisions, Bill, basically along the way,
All the way,
tactically speaking?
actually. Even on D-Day, he made the right decision.
He did.
Oh, and I know I have feeling that he had sweated that day so many hours because it rained, stormy, and whatnot, and he knew that we were sitting out there on the waterfront. He couldn't call us back.
Yeah.
It was too dangerous.
Yeah.
And all other activities had started around,
Right.
so forth, so that the world was on his shoulder, and he made the right decisions, and he made the right moves, with the exception of maybe he didn't give in to, he shouldn't have given in too much to the Russians in Berlin, but that was part of
That was the political game that was
political
being
game. That's
yeah,
right.
he didn't have
played at
much
that time.
choice.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, Bill, where were you on VE Day now when the war in Europe officially wound down?
I was I was in Prague, Czechoslovakia. I had enough points whereby they picked me up, flew me to into France to Lucky Strike place. They called it one area Lucky Strike, and then flew me back from there through all around back to Fort Devens, and upon arriving at Fort Devens, I was discharged within 24 hours.
Boy, that was fast, Richard.
Boy, talk about coming out of it quickly.
Oh, they picked a, and the thing about it, in my original outfit that started on D-Day, there was only 7 of us left. We all 7 came back.
Out of how many, roughly?
Out of, I would say 280.
Only
300.
only 7 out of almost 300.
Yeah.
So, Bill, what did you do now as you came back, were discharged rather quickly, and what happened to you at that point?
I went into public accounting, didn't like it. I looked around for another job, was without a job, and Puritan from Beverly had a placements bureau in Boston, and I went to see him, and he says, there's a job opening in Beverly, Mass. at a plant called Ventron. I says, I live out in North Reading now, I'll try it. So I went, came down, and ironically, the president of metal hydrides at that time was Dr. Alexander, a Russian. And so when I found that he was Russian, I talked to him in Russian and so forth. He hired me as an accountant with Mr. Fairbank. And I was there until Dr. Alexander died, and S.K. Dadarian took over, and then Mr. Davis took over. And when that finished, Board of Directors got a man by the name of Milton Lowenstein to come in as a new president and revise the whole company from a research company to a really manufacturing. We had come up with a product called sodium borehydride that the government really wanted to put up into high energy fuel and so forth. So we started there, and we built a plant out in Danvers. the government wasn't successful in utilizing the material. Our research was able to find outlets for sodium borohydride, paper companies, and so forth, and it grew. Metal hydride, when I went in, was about $2 million in sales. At the time that I retired, they were 95 million.
Oh.
And Milton Mausan and the group built it from small unit to a fairly large unit.
Mm-hmm.
And it was bought by Thiokol and then Morton International.
I see. And during World War II, did they not do some research down there? Various degrees?
Down in Beverly here, they did a lot of research on atomic bomb.
We're talking about the plant along the Danvers River.
That's right.
Yep.
They did a lot, and that's where Dr. Alexander did most of his work in there. And this is practically maybe why he lost his life in what.
You know, there was some speculation about the land in that area as recently as a year or so ago, Richard. I guess they were excavating down there, and they were concerned about some of the contamination that possibly might have gotten into the ground.
Well, they did a lot of work for the government. As a matter of fact, when I went in, I had to get a Q clearance because in running the costs and so forth, I'd have to have all the background of the material, and so that. And this is why I couldn't go anywhere out of the country.
Mm. So this is really how you came to live in Beverly.
I came to live with Beverly, working for metal hydrides.
And this would have been in the late 40s, are we talking about?
No, I joined them in 52.
1952.
Yep.
So you moved to Beverly at that point in time
I moved to Beverly
with your family?
With my family. Built a house on Berrywood Lane,
Mm-hmm.
the whole estate there.
Yep.
And all of my children graduated from Beverly High School, 4 of them. And they all went through school. I have Bill, who has his PhD in chemical engineering. Steve has got his BS degree in mechanical engineering. My daughter Ruth taught here in Beverly for a while, was a teacher. Joanne went to France for a while, and then she graduated from the University of Mass, and she now teaches in Troy, New York. Her husband is a PhD in nuclear physics. I can't talk to him. He's way out, but he's a professor at RMI.
And you have many grandchildren, do you?
I have 9, I got to count, 9 grandchildren and 1 great-grandchild.
Great. That's wonderful.
And
That's wonderful.
wonderful.
Now, where did you meet your wife, and when were you married?
I was married in 1942. I met my wife at the Mass General Hospital through a friend of mine that when we went in, were training in Falmouth, and coming back from these maneuvers, his truck tipped over and killed him.
Oh.
And so she introduced my wife to me. She was a friend of his, and so far I knew her. So
Love at first sight, huh?
yeah. Oh, she. We've been married 55 years.
That's great. Now, in the minute or two that we have left, Bill, I know that you wanted to say, or would like to say a word about the SCORE organization.
We have in this area one of the best free volunteer area, and that is Service Corps of Retired Executives. It is all free, and they're all executives from presidents marketing man and so forth, and we guide any young individual who's starting into business that needs help and knowing how to go about it. We can give him or her the actual experience that we have and guide them so that they be successful. If we can possibly help one succeed, we've done our duty. This score is actually sponsored by the Small Business Administration in Boston.
That sounds like a marvelous group, does it not, Richard?
Mm-hmm, yeah, I've heard about that, and you see public service announcements on television from time to time advertising this group, and it's nice to know somebody involved in it directly right here in our own community.
Right. A last quick word for Bill. We're right down to time.
Yeah, Bill, if you look back on the entire World War II experience that you had, if you could just in one or two sentences sum up your feelings about it, what would that be?
I hope it wasn't in vain.
Amen.
I hope that we never have any war like that again. I thought we fought for peace, and I hope it stays that way.
I think that about says it all, Richard.
Mm-hmm, indeed.
Bill Zolner, we thank you so much for coming on to Times Past. This is your second visit with us, and we really cherish your conversation tonight. And at age 80, you look just marvelous for a young fellow that you are, young in spirit anyways. And thanks again so much for coming by.
You're welcome.
And Richard, we hope we'll be able to continue with our series inviting these fine veterans to come back and recall some of their experiences, all of which took place more than 50 years ago.
That's right.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for watching tonight. Ed Joseph signing off. We'll see you a little later on.